Hello everyone, and thank you for joining me on this session today. My name is Akkoub. I'm a Senior Alliances and Channel Solutions Architect with GitLab. In this recording, I'll try to explain and simplify GitLab single sign-on, LDAP, and OmniAuth integration. But before I do that, let's review together the GitLab authentication and authorization documentation. As you can see, GitLab integrates with a number of OmniAuth providers and some external authentication and authorization providers, such as LDAP, Google Secure LDAP, SAML for GitLab.com, and SmartCard. But the thing I want to focus on this page is this table, actually, which explains the difference between SaaS and self-managed GitLab when it comes to a user's provisioning, user's profile update, user's authentication, and of course the behavior upon user removal. For example, user provisioning in the SaaS is available only through the SCIM and SAML. Meanwhile, in the GitLab self-managed, it's available on the LDAP, SAML, OmniAuth providers, and the SCIM. In the SaaS, user provisioning means the user is added to the group, but not a new user added to the actual GitLab.com instance. In the self-managed, user provisioning means a new user will be added into the GitLab.com instance. Updating user detail. It's not available in the GitLab.com, while I can do that through LDAP synchronization in the self-managed GitLab, and I will show you that in a second. For the authentication, in the GitLab.com, SAML can be configured on the top level group. So if I have a group hierarchy with multiple groups under it, only at the very top level group, I can configure SAML integration for authentication, so that a user will log into the GitLab.com normally, but once he clicks on that group, he will be redirected to the SAML identity provider to be authenticated. On the other side, in the GitLab self-managed, authentication can be provided through LDAP, Generic Auth 2.0, SAML, Kerberos, JWT, SmartCard, and OmniAuth providers. And I will show you the LDAP and SAML integration in the session later on. Also, for the provider to GitLab role synchronization, for the SaaS, on the group level, SAML group synchronization can be enabled so that a group from the SAML assertion can be mapped to a group in GitLab. While in the GitLab self-managed, both LDAP and SAML group synchronization and linking actually is supported. And the last but definitely not least, user removal. In the GitLab.com, when a user removal, again, similar to the user addition, means the user will be removed from the group, not actually blocked as a user from the GitLab.com instance. On the other side, for the self-managed, user removal means a user will be removed from the group and will be flagged as a blocked user from the instance. And also that's available through SIM. So it is very important to review this table when it comes to designing the SSO and users provisioning and authentication for your instance. Depending on which consumption model you have for GitLab, the SaaS or the self-managed, and what features you want to apply, it really directs you through the documentation and where to configure these functions, because it really differs. Excellent. This is good for here. As I said before, this session is for the LDAP and SAML authentication. So let's dive into some of the key points when it comes to the LDAP integration. Again, what I'm trying to do here is to summarize the key, or let's say the most frequently asked questions or points or things that usually we think about when it comes to LDAP integration. First, LDAP integration supports any LDAP compliant directory. Basically, almost any LDAP service available today would be able to integrate with GitLab, any LDAP compliant directory. Of course, Microsoft Active Directory, Apple Open LDAP, and 3897. Cool. Can I configure multiple LDAP directories for the GitLab instance? Absolutely yes. By the way, all what I'm describing here is for GitLab self-managed, just to make it very clear. Users can authenticate with Git using their GitLab username or their email and LDAP password. This is extremely important. Does it mean that I have LDAP integration in the background between GitLab and LDAP server? Actually, I think I have it here. Does it mean that I have this integration that the user will not be able, if he already has a username and password already registered in the GitLab server, that they will not be able to log in? They would still be able to log in. That's one of the reasons you may consider disabling users' registration on the GitLab portal if you have LDAP integration in the background, because maybe you want to have all the users coming from your LDAP directory and not to enable them to register directly to the instance. Excellent. By default, the synchronization between the LDAP server and the GitLab server will happen once a day. That's the default behavior. And I like to be precise, it will happen at 1:30 a.m. based on the server timing, of course, to do this synchronization. And in this synchronization, if the user is like based on the email address matching, if the user doesn't exist, has been removed from the LDAP, has been placed under the blocked or moved out of the base domain in the LDAP, he will be flagged as a blocked user in GitLab. Now, can we change this schedule? Can we make it based on a different or multiple times a day? Absolutely, yes, you can change, but that's the default behavior. As I said before, if the user is blocked, actually, if he's blocked, if he's outside of the search, or even if the whole group is removed from LDAP, the user will be placed under the blocked users. Now, okay, this is the good time to consider, what do we mean by inactive users in LDAP? Removed from the LDAP, outside the base DN. Remember, when you integrate GitLab with LDAP server, you have to map it with a group name inside your LDAP. It's your choice whether to go to the top level group in the GitLab in the LDAP hierarchy, but that means all the users in your LDAP will be able to log in to GitLab, which counts against users. Or you may decide to go, okay, I want to have only certain groups or subgroups in my LDAP to log in to the GitLab, and this is where you use a base domain DN for that group. Or maybe you want to have that base domain along with the DN or user filter property to filter for certain users with certain attributes from your LDAP to be able to log into the GitLab server. So if he is outside that DN or user search filter, if he is removed from LDAP, or if he is marked as a disabled or deactivated user in the LDAP directory, especially when the LDAP is already integrated with an NEHR system in the background, which will update the user status in the LDAP, and means that immediately that user, not immediately, once the user is synced, that user profile will be deactivated and blocked in the GitLab server. Cool, I think I've covered already that user search filter using the DN name. Now, the next is when the status of that user checked. Yes, the synchronization happens once a day and you can configure that. But what about the status check for the user? First, whenever the user signs in, starting from GitLab 14.4, that's if he signs in with any authentication provider, the status will be checked. Is this an active user? Is he still active user or not? Second, once per hour for web sessions. So a user is working, the web session is open, once per hour, the status check will happen. Third, whenever the user is doing get over HTTP request, simply git pull or clone for the repo over HTTP, that will trigger the synchronization, or once per day, based on what we mentioned before on the synchronization between LDAP and the GitLab server. Group syncing. Okay, so this is very important. Not only about users checking and user status. We can map groups from your LDAP directory to groups into your GitLab server. So whenever a user is added to that group, he's automatically given access to GitLab server. Again, a group is the top level where I have multiple projects grouped under that group. So basically, users added to that group or synchronized to that group will have access projects under that group based on the assigned role, of course. Okay, LDAP UI can be disabled, especially when SAML authentication is enabled. I'll cover that more later, but quickly here, basically, if I have a different authentication process for my users, simply I'm using an external authentication with multi-factor authentication maybe enabled, I don't want my users to still be able to log in through my LDAP because basically they are bypassing that external authentication. So what I can do is enable the LDAP synchronization in the background, but also disable the UI login for users to log in through that LDAP server. Okay, the last point here is very important. Last point on the right, LDAP synchronization update users and group information for existing GitLab users that have LDAP identity assigned. It does not create a new GitLab users through LDAP. So when we have LDAP synchronization between GitLab and LDAP, similar to this here, this LDAP synchronization will not create a new user by default into a GitLab. Now, when that user will be created, the user will be created only if this user logs into GitLab through that LDAP authentication, and then he will be redirected to the authentication through the LDAP, and the account will be created. Actually, let me show you, as we already covered most of the LDAP integration, let me show you how do I do the LDAP configuration. So if I open my GitLab.rb file, this is the section where you do LDAP configuration. Basically, what we're saying is GitLab true, and then I'm providing the GitLab server details. Actually, I am using this sample online GitLab LDAP server, which is this one here. Basically, this is a sample LDAP test server. These are the connection details. This is the port, the CN, everything. So all what I had to do is copy that and put it into my LDAP configuration in the GitLab.rb. Of course, that LDAP server doesn't support TLS, so I had to use plain, and basically that's it. Once you have that, you just reconfigure the instance, and that's it. You have an instance configured. So because I have the LDAP integration, I have two tabs now. The standard one, as you would expect, this is where normal users registered in GitLab will log in. And then you have the LDAP tab one where users coming from the LDAP will log in. Now, despite I have this synchronization, still users are not created inside my GitLab server. And to prove that, if I log in through as a root, as an admin, if I go under my admin area, if I go under users, and then these are all the users here. We have our friend Albert Einstein. So from all of these users, only this one, which I used before for testing, is logged in. So let's take this one, this user, or maybe what do you like? Maybe Newton. Newton is good. Let's take this one. Newton here is not added to prove that. Let's log out now. And this time I will log in into my LDAP using Newton, login as my friend. So what's happening here? Yeah, LDAP synchronization is processed now. I checked with my LDAP profile. The user is authenticated, and I provided the right username and password. All that I have to do is just to select these one-time questions, and that's it. So now I have my Newton user added in my LDAP. Actually, when the user is added, the user attributes are extracted from the response from the LDAP assertion, right? So if I go here, I have my profile as Newton, and I have the full name. So now if I log out and log back again as root, here we go, 1, 2, and this one, and this time if I go under my admin area, under my users, and I have our friend Isaac Newton added as a user, and you can see he's the only one who's been added today. Excellent. So basically that covers our LDAP integration scenario. Maybe one thing, not sure if I covered. Yep, here we go. These are the attributes that will be used to create the user in the LDAP server, as what we have just seen. So username, email, name, first name, and last name. So these attributes have to be passed back from the LDAP integration back to GitLab when the authentication happens. Upon signing in as a user, the check will happen. So now if I log in again as Newton, the check will still happen, right? And it will check for my details, and it will check that my account is, or Zagi Newton account is still active in this sample LDAP. Now, this is a very important feature. In GitLab, I can map certain groups, key groups in GitLab to groups back in the LDAP server. So in my case here, with the LDAP, and please remember that because later in SAML we have different groups. In LDAP, we have two groups, the admin and external users. So what I'm doing here, if I click on this one, take me to the documentation. So what I'm doing here is basically I am telling the GitLab server which group in my LDAP, if the user belongs to that group, then please consider him part of the admin group in GitLab. Fair? So instead of manually adding admins, you may have an admin group in your LDAP where all of your admin users are defined, maybe operation admins or platform admins. So basically what you can do here is, this is fixed. Admin group here is fixed. What you have to do is map it to the group and the GitLab. Where do you put this? Simply in the same configuration where we had. So this one, inside my gitlab.rb file. It's a gitlab/gitlab.rb file. Excellent. Remember, when you configure admin group, you have to configure the base group for your admin group, okay? The other scenario is when you have a group for external users. This is very helpful, especially when you have contractors. Basically, in GitLab, we have something called external users group, or users within this group are considered external. What does that mean? By default, the users in that external users group have the external users roles. And these are the roles that these users can do. They cannot create project, group, and snippets in their personal namespaces, can only create projects, subgroups, snippets within the top level groups to which they are explicitly granted. Imagine, you have a contractor, you want him to help you doing something. You don't want that contractor to create a separate project or group inside your GitLab instance. You would make him part of the external group in GitLab so that only to the projects you assign him to, you explicitly add him to, he will be able, or groups, he will be able to function. Can only access public projects or projects they are explicitly granted access. Again, within your organization, you may have some public projects you are sharing with the community, and the rest are internal projects, and each team is responsible for his own project. So basically, these contractors, either they will have access either to these public projects or to the projects they are being added inside your organization. They won't be able to see all the different internal projects. Can only access public snippets, can only access public groups, and you would imagine the explicitly granted access. So this is very important and easy to configure. Again, just to summarize, can I have multiple LDAP servers? Yes. Where do I define LDAP configuration in my gitlab.rb file under the Rails configuration? How the synchronization between users and groups happening? It happens once a day by default, and you can change that schedule. Is it only synchronizing users or synchronizing users and group? It is synchronizing both. Users status between the LDAP and the GitLab users. Is the user still active or not? Is he still within my LDAP group or not? Per user status. Second, group status or group membership. That's only available in the GitLab Premium. Subfunction from that is the explicit mapping between external and admin users. Whenever a user is added to a certain admin users in group in your LDAP, that group can be mapped into an admin group into GitLab, and same for external users, which, as I said before, is very useful when it comes to external contractors, basically, or maybe other use cases. Okay, excellent. So now let's move into the SAML. Actually, SAML and OmniAuth integration are almost the same exact steps. And for my use case here, just as an example, I am using the, out of all the whole list here, I'm using the auth integration. But again, each of these OmniAuth providers, we have fully documented steps on how to do that configuration. But for my Auth0, I'm using it for both SAML and OmniAuth authentication, and I'll switch between the two to show you the difference. Excellent. To start with, this is my account. All what I had to do is log in, then going through applications, and then applications here. And I've created an application for my GitLab. You just create an application, and here we go. This is all the information you will need to do the configuration. The only thing you will need to fill is this callback URL. Basically, once the authentication is done, where the user should be redirected. Because I'm using 2.0 for both SAML and OmniAuth integration, I have two callback URLs because I'm using the same Auth0 provider as OmniAuth and SAML provider. Excellent. In my case here, I have, I believe in this example, let's go into OmniAuth. Oh, yep, here we go. And I'll just bring it up. Okay, so this is how to configure OmniAuth here, or SAML if you like. So basically, the main thing is you have to configure the provider under here. And then in my case, I have OmniAuth provider of 0, and then the client ID, the secret, the domain, scope, all that. This all information is already provided by the provider. The client ID, the secret, all of that, right? So this is all provided here. If we go up here, that yes, I have OmniAuth enabled, I have the single sign-on using this provider, and then I have these things in disabled, but I can keep them enabled if I want to synchronize the profile and the email. So if I have this one, this auto sign-in enabled, I will not be shown the login page. I will be, once I go to the home page or login page for GitLab, I will be immediately redirected to the OmniAuth. Okay, this is very important. Block auto create users, and I have it here as true, okay? So before I change it to false, what does it mean? Basically, when a user tries to log in here, for example, when I log in through my SAML, once I click onto this SAML here, it will redirect me. Okay. So this is using the OmniAuth label. The auth label, as you can see here, it is using from my previous configuration, the SAML. So what we'll do is I'll change this auto create user to false, and we will do reconfigure false. So basically, I am saying that GitLab, once the user SAML is returned from the SAML provider, if that user, and the match here is happening using the email, if that user does not exist in GitLab, please automatically create a new user in my GitLab server. And I will come to what is the password question in a second. So if I do here, this one, and do reconfigure. So while it is reconfiguring, let me continue here. So this is the SAML configuration, what I've just showed you. Now remember in LDAP, where we said that an LDAP group can be mapped to a user group in GitLab? Okay, excellent. In SAML, that goes to 4 different groups, not only 2. So not only external and admin, I have also required and auditor. So basically what's happening here is I am, for example, if I click on this one, if I go under, required. So I am telling GitLab that when a user is returned from the SAML, please make sure that under the groups field, okay, the user has one of these different groups listed. Basically, I'm saying that only users from these groups in the attribute, in the assertion from the SAML provider are allowed to log into GitLab. Okay, so this configuration has 2 parts. First, the group attribute. So here I'm telling GitLab, in which attribute in the SAML assertion to look for the value of the group. So here I'm saying that in the reply from the SAML assertion, there will be an attribute called groups. Okay? Second, in that attribute value, the value should be one of these different groups in order for that user to be allowed to log into my GitLab server. I hope it's clear. So two things here. First, once the user is authenticated with the SAML provider, a SAML assertion, a message will be sent back to GitLab. In that message, if I want to use the GitLab required group option, in that message, there should be a field. And in our case here, we decided to name it groups. And that's why we are telling GitLab to look into that field name. That field called groups, an attribute. And that attribute value should have one of these different values, right? My friends, to show you what do I mean by attribute, if I go into this one here, zero, I can actually click on debug and show you this is a SAML message. So this is what I mean by an attribute. And the attribute has a name and a value. In my case here, this is the attribute name and this is the attribute value. So if I have required groups enabled, there should be an attribute here named something, let's say groups, under condition that this is the same value you will configure in GitLab in the groups, and the value should be one of the different groups here. It can be anything, right? For the under the groups attribute in the SAML reply, if the value is admins, then that user, that authenticated user, should be considered part of or should be added to the admins group. I hope that's clear. In the LDAP, we only have two options, external and admin. In the SAML, I have external and admin plus auditor and required groups. Okay. I believe my GitLab has been reconfigured, so I can now refresh this one. And actually, let me go here. Yep. You see this one now? It's auth 0, similar. If I go to the configurations, back to the configurations, this is the same as this label. By the way, the label can be anything, right? So now, if I click on this one, I will be redirected to my SAML provider. I can come here, log in with my Google account here and my Google password, next. And now the user will be redirected into the GitLab server. Of course, this is the two-factor authentication available through the auth. So now if I come into the auth authentication and I log in through my Google account using my Gmail account and then log in and then come into this one and log in. And of course, it will ask me to verify my identity, confirm, and here we go. The user will be redirected back into GitLab and log in. Easy, right? Awesome. Now, the other points I want to highlight here. As an administrator, I can configure GitLab to automatically link SAML users with existing GitLab users upon login, as what we have just done now here. Also, individual users can log into their account and manually go under preferences and go under account and then link. It's already linked here because I just logged in, but a user, if this is not even linked, a user can come here and link their account to the configured SAML provider. Okay, so it's a two-way thing. Other thing is, okay, by default, this is very important, number 4 there. By default, local part of the email address is used to generate GitLab username for the desired or logged in user. But the password, okay, will be automatically generated by GitLab. This is only if OmniAuth block auto create user is set to false, which is what we have done in the configuration file, which is this one, auto create user. So basically, what I'm saying here, a user will log in, a user will try to log in, user will be redirected to the OmniAuth provider. The OmniAuth provider will check the user, will provide the login page for the user to login, will authenticate the user, will check the user identity, and will redirect back the SAML assertion to GitLab. Now, if there is no user in GitLab with the same email address and the block auto create user set to false in the GitLab.rb file, a user will be generated inside the GitLab server. The username for that generated user will be a value in the email address, and there will be a generated password. That password will never be provided to the user directly. That's why users will need to use their token to do HTTP or to authenticate and do HTTP requests to the GitLab server. Okay, I think I've covered them all. Yep, you can do two things here. I've covered the group membership for the SAML, but also I want to show you that you can do SAML group synchronization and SAML group links. What's the difference? In the SAML group synchronization, it synchronizes SAML response group field with a value to GitLab group or GitLab users group or GitLab group. Okay, so basically similar to the LDAP group synchronization, if you remember, right? SAML group to GitLab group. Simply, SAML group to GitLab group. With the SAML group link, right? It is linking a SAML group to a role inside that group or subgroups. So basically in this one, I think there is, yep, in this one, you see here, it is not only linking to a group, right? It's also linking to an access role inside that group. So this is important. So we have two things, SAML group link and SAML group synchronization. Let me open the other one. SAML group synchronization and SAML group link. SAML group synchronization is basically syncing users in SAML group to GitLab group. Basically, users in this group will be available as users in that group, which means in that GitLab group, if it is already added with different roles to different projects inside GitLab, the users synced will have the same roles. Imagine that I have a group called developers, right? And then I am mapping, and there is a developers group in the SAML assertion. So a user is coming back and he is under that group, right? This is it. Again, we are using the groups, a group attribute, right? I am referring back and I am sending back that group name to GitLab. That user, because he is under the developers group in LDAP, will be added to the, if that's map, will be added to the developers group in GitLab, which means that wherever there is a project, this group is added with whatever role, that user will have the same. Okay, then we come to the second one, which is the group link. So basically with the group link, I am linking, right, a group in my SAML assertion to a group inside GitLab, and I'm assigning what access level that group will have, right? So basically that's it for me today. Maybe the last thing I want to show you, because I promised, is the SAML integration. So if I switch my, let me go out here and go and I have yep, this is the SAML. So I'll just, okay, so this is the same configuration file but a different copy with this time the SAML configure. It's almost exactly the same. I have SAML, the label, I have the provider, and as you can see here, I have this one as disabled because I want users to be automatically created. And yeah, basically that's it. So I hope this video has been helpful to you, and thank you very much for watching.